Hello, everybody. My name is Faith, and welcome to the newest episode of my podcast. It's called Know Your Brain. It's about all things psychological, and we hope to give you some information today to learn how to live a bountiful life. So today, my guest is Dr. Brulles, and she works at the University of Arizona, and she has a long history of working in a school board and coordinating gifted programs. She's also the author of many books, and she teaches teachers. So today, I'm so glad to have you as my guest. I said a little bit about your background, but of course I can't go into great detail because we've just met. Can you tell me about your background and your education and your interest in gifted education?
Sure, but first I need to clarify is I'm with Arizona State University.
Okay,
ASU and U of A are kind of rivals, so I just want to make sure that it's clear.
I didn't know. So Arizona State University, thank you.
Yes, yes. So I've done a lot of work in building inclusive gifted programs, and that starts with equitable identification. And so that's my main priorities in this field. And I came into gifted education like most people, most teachers in the field, because I'm a parent of a gifted child. And I saw him struggling in school, and I realized that I needed to learn more about it. And so that really launched my career. I was already a teacher at the time, and I was a bilingual teacher and an ELL teacher. And then I learned about gifted, and it really kind of took over. Like you said, I've written a number of books, eight books, as a matter of fact. And the one work, my most recent work, is with Dr. Jack Naglieri, and I'm going to be talking about our work in a moment. So besides how I entered the field, I was a teacher for a number of years. Then I was a gifted coordinator, then director of gifted services for two different large districts. And I've been at Arizona State University since about 2005, and that's where I got my PhD from, in gifted. So yeah, it's pretty much become my world.
I have a lot of questions, which is great. So your son, how old was he when you noticed something different about him or that he was struggling with school?
I noticed something different right off. I mean, when he was 2 years old, he started um, me- memorizing the books that I was reading to him. And by three, he was reading books himself. And as you know, that's when you enter kindergarten already reading and having some vast interests, which our gifted learners do. And it starts at a young age. So it kind of propelled me into the field to learn more about it. But at ASU, where I'm teaching teachers, I always ask, why are you here? What brought you here? And 9 out of 10 times they say either because I was a parent of gifted child who I've seen struggle in school, or I was a gifted student and school didn't fit for me very well. So I want to make a difference with the students that I teach. So most of the parents and most of the teachers come into the field being parents or having that experience of school is not a perfect fit for me. We have to figure out something different to do with these kids.
Is your son finished his education now?
He is. He's in cybersecurity. He's in quantum physics. Does
Okay.
national defense for the country. He does cybersecurity for national defense. And when I talk about gifted kids struggling in school, he had middle school teachers telling him, "You will never get out of high school." Okay.
Wow.
And this is not uncommon for a lot of our gifted kids because with the giftedness, as you know, comes a lot of dual exceptionalities. They might be twice exceptional, dyslexic, dysgraphic, ADD, ADHD, OCD. Those are not uncommon with our students. Actually, that just describes my son, right?
Yeah.
Um, but but teachers to become certified, I mean, as a teacher, they don't require any background work in gifted education. Although we do need to learn about special ed, we do need to learn about EL students, especially in the United States, but there's no prerequisite coursework and for gifted kids. And if you think about the bell curve, there are equal percentages on both sides of
Yeah.
kids that struggle that have need special education services and those that need gifted, but the teachers are not prepared to work with those students.
What percentage of children do you think need gifted services?
Um, I was on the board of directors for the National Association for Gifted Children, NAGC, and there I was the governance secretary and the school district rep. So I spent a lot of times with them. And this is a question we get asked a lot. What percentage should I be identifying? And the NAGC says it's usually about 8 to 10% of the kids
Okay.
in your schools. Um, Now with that, 8 to 10%, there's that comes includes these kids that are twice exceptional, that are EL students. So that really drives a lot of my interest by looking in equity and gifted education, because the kids we miss are the kids who a lot of times come from different cultures, speak different languages, or don't have a big support system at home, so they're not being read to at an early age, like many of our children are. So
Yeah.
we miss a lot of those kids. And so that's what really drives a lot of my work, is trying to find equitable ways to identify these kids who might not be speaking English, who might not be achieving highly in school, who those type of kids that we miss in our programs.
So you're talking about ELL children often get missed. Do you think children from very poor families often get missed?
Absolutely. And those
Like an
are
economic issue?
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those times the parents don't have that higher education to know what to look for, to advocate for their kids at the schools, where there are a lot of more affluent parents will advocate for their kids, or will provide some of that early childhood experiences that help them advance prior to coming
Right.
into school, so that they can demonstrate. A lot of the work that I do with Dr. Naglieri is trying to find ways to identify the kids who have been missing in our schools. And those are the exact kids that we've been missing, the ones that you just
Okay.
described.
So how do most schools identify gifted, and what's the ideal way to identify gifted in an equitable way?
Okay. How historically, for
Yeah, historically.
decades and decades, schools relied on parents and teachers to nominate the students for it to be screened for identification. Now, when you think about that, thinking about only 3 states in the United States require any pre-certification coursework in gifted, right? And 86% of the teachers in the US are middle-class white women. So if you are not,
What percent is middle class white women?
86% of
Okay.
teachers are middle-class white women. So if you
Yeah, I work with a lot
don't
of women.
have that
That's
cultural background that's similar to what your students are, you're not going to recognize the strengths and the potentials that some of these kids have. And being that most teachers come into the field without any understanding of giftedness, so it's a double whammy. Those are the kids that we're going to miss most.
so are
Those
most of the states still doing that, like a nomination system?
we have moved. We're trying to turn the corner there. A lot of schools still do that, still use
Wow.
nominations.
That's
And
the
then
most subjective, unfair
it
thing.
sure is.
Now, when I
Eight,
was in grade 4, I'm going to tell a personal story
okay.
because people love personal stories. So, um, when I was in grade 4, I got nominated to be tested for gifted. And hadn't thought about that aspect of it, that I got nominated. So the teacher would have to probably like you, right? You'd have to be a relatively well-behaved student.
Exactly.
Um, right. She's not going to nominate you likely if you're misbehaving or inattentive, right? And I got nominated, I got tested, and the test they used to screen was an academic test initially, which probably isn't, but this was the 80s, so I'm just putting it under that umbrella.
I'm sorry to
I'm
say
calling
this is still happening
I'm
right
calling
now.
it the olden times, so it's okay that that happened in the 80s. So they started with the academic test because that seems unfair. And then I did the academic testing. It was literacy and math, and I didn't get high enough. So that was the end of my screening. But schools are still doing that. They're starting with an academic screening.
A lot of the states have that in their state mandate for criteria for identification. They want to look at ability plus achievement.
Okay.
Now, I'm fortunate to be living in Arizona, where our state mandate only looks at ability. So the work that I've been doing with Dr. Naglieri is to um, try to identify students with a high potential in ways that is not confounded with academic knowledge
Right.
or with language. So the new tests that we have developed together are able to identify students' potential, students who have high ability, but might not be highly achieving. They might not even speak English. So we have developed a way to identify those kids that historically the tools that we've used do not
Yeah.
uh, miss those kids. And even some of the ability tests that are out there, like the IQ tests, like some of the IQ tests, do rely, first of all, they rely on English language. So immediately we're going to miss those kids. But they also include academic knowledge in the test items. And those are ability tests.
Yeah.
Like the cognitive abilities test is a great test, but it really does include some achievement base and like some of the IQ tests that you were mentioning.
The test
So
authors have to be really aware for every question to take out anything academic, and sometimes they don't, and I wonder what kind of they don't take out things that might include academic knowledge. But I know Dr. Naglieri does really focus on that.
yeah, and it's not their fault. It's just that's the teacher training that we experience. And that's why I said, because we don't include giftedness into some of that teacher preparation, teachers will focus on the academics
Oh yeah,
first.
I
And
think
like you
teacher
said,
education
behaviors.
should have more teaching about neuropsychology. Like what is intelligence, right? It's not being able to do math. It's not being able to define words, right? That's not intelligence. Those are learned skills.
Exactly. It's the
Yeah.
thinking processes. So the test that I know that Jack talked about with you is called the Naglieri General Ability Test. And it is verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal. And all of those tests, the three tests, are standalone tests. They're measures of general ability. So it's the construct of the test item that makes it verbal, quantitative, or nonverbal. It's not the way of thinking. So what we say is those are measures of general ability, that can be determined through verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal test items. And that's where, in our tests, have no directions, no oral directions, no oral responses. There's no English spoken. The test items, I wrote the verbal test with Jack, and even the verbal items do not have any words in them. It's a conceptual understanding of language cognition. It's all of it's based on Alexander Luria's work on language cognition. And that's through conceptual understandings of how people develop language, and
I'll
whatever,
just
regardless of the
Yeah.
language.
I'll just tell people who Alexander Luria was.
Thank
He's
you.
passed away in the 70s, but he was a brilliant Russian psychologist, and he worked on understanding what the different regions of the brain did. And he authored a lot of books. And before Luria, people didn't understand what the different regions of the brain did. And now, or that maybe it wasn't, yeah, it was just a mystery. So he brought a lot of clarity to that.
So yes, and that's what we based a lot of our work on for these new tests, based on his theories.
And I'll say if people want to see a short video about Alexander Luria, there is a short video in my posts on my YouTube channel. So if you're
Oh, wonderful.
interested in learning a bit more about him, I put a video about him because I love him. He's the father of neuropsychology.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm glad I know this, because I will now link that to one of my presentations, because oftentimes people at conferences, they ask me, what's the background here? And I mention it, but it's good to know that there's a short video that kind of explains some of his work.
Yeah. I don't remember learning about him in psychology classes. I learned about Robert Speary, who talked about the brain hemispheres, which is very important too. But we didn't learn about Luria, and I'm not sure, like that seems like a real shame. So I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah,
So
especially because he was so brilliant in that specific area, in many areas, but he was a lone voice for language cognition
oh yeah.
at the
Okay.
time.
So you'll be happy to know. So I work for a large school board in Canada, and the way they do gifted screening is they screen all the grade fours, I think in November, but don't quote me. And they are using the test that you authored with Dr. Naglieri. This is the book about it. It's
Yes,
called the NGAT, if you want the acronym, Naglieri General Abilities Test. So every student in grade four does the NGAT, and they're
nice.
using that because they want to have an equitable chance for the students to qualify and be identified. I would say in my school board, at least 50% of the children, English is their second language. And in
Wow.
some of the schools, it's 99%.
Wow.
Like some of the schools, they come into kindergarten and maybe they've learned some English from their older siblings, but the parents don't speak English. So,
Interesting.
so some schools it's like 99%, some schools it's 50%. It would be
So,
odd to, yeah.
and this is exactly, it kind of, it's very much like it is in the United States. I didn't realize those percentages were that high there. But you had asked about how people get nominated or how we identify. In the past, it was all through teacher and parent nominations, which is why we have underrepresented populations in our
Well, for
schools.
sure.
But now more schools are using universal screening, like what you are just describing in the fourth grade. And we really encourage it even between K2, because if you wait till the fourth grade, you're missing a lot of opportunity to impact a child's trajectory through school. So we like to advocate for as early as possible so that we can give the information to the teachers so that they can work with the students and develop some of that potential from an early
So
age on.
K2 is senior kindergarten.
What's that?
Senior kindergarten is what you're saying. In
Yes.
Canada, we call it junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten.
Oh, cool.
You said K2.
Yes.
So that is young to identify for sure. And I haven't heard that before, but you're talking about the benefits of identifying very young.
Well, like I said, when I in my introduction, I said I was a coordinator and a director for gifted services for two different school districts, large school districts. The first one was a Title district, a Title I district, which means very most of the students are in poverty, right? And it
Okay.
was highly Hispanic. So there was about at the time, about 90% of the students were Hispanic, and 90% of the students in our gifted program were white, which means that we were doing a
Mm.
really good job identifying the small 10% of the white students, but a
That's a
horrible job.
statistical impossible. I know that happened, but that would, oh
I
my
know.
goodness, that's so
So what we did was
glaring.
we started using the NGAT at the time because this was before the NGAT came out.
Okay.
And a lot of my work is in cluster grouping. And so we started using the nonverbal test and cluster grouping. And after 6 years, those percentages reversed. 80%, 80 some percent of our gifted students were Hispanic.
So it
After
represented the population in a school.
it did. And so we know it works. But we've been doing the same thing for so long of using those tests and having parent and teacher nominations that we've got the research. The research is clear that what we need to do, but it's taken decades for the schools to turn that corner and start universally screening kids at an early age with assessments, with tools that are not heavily language based.
So with the NGAT, what's the age range you can take that test?
The Naglier General Abilities Test goes from kinder through ninth grade so
Okay.
far. We do have national norms through US through sixth grade, K through six, and they're developing those for the upper grades. And I do believe they're also developing some of those norms for Canada's population.
So you mentioned cluster grouping. Can you explain what that is? I don't know what that is.
So I wrote the cluster grouping handbook with Susan Weinbrenner years ago, and then since been revised. But basically, what cluster grouping means is that at every grade level, all the kids that are identified at that grade level are put into one class that's also heterogeneous. So there might be five, there might be eight, there might be 10, there might be three gifted students at what a given grade level. Say it's grade three. And then all of those eight kids or five kids, three kids are put into this cluster class. And what we do is we try to narrow the range. So if you think about the bell curve and the outliers on each ed, the farthest, far below average and the highest, right?
Mhm.
If you have both of those ends in one class, it means that the teacher's attention is really drawn to both ends and the middle. It's really hard then to
Oh,
work with the
yes.
gifted students. So what we try to do is we try to narrow that range within each classroom. So with putting the gifted students into one class, that in that class we don't have the farthest below average, which a lot of times might be some of our special ed students, but we can have special ed students in every level, right? it depends on what the IEP is for. But what we do by narrowing that range, we're helping the teacher to focus better on the kids that she has in that class, the higher kids, the gifted students, whether they speak, regardless of whether they speak English or they're achieving highly, they have the
Mhm.
potential. So we have to teach the teachers what it means to be gifted, how to develop that potential, how to differentiate the instruction, on all those wonderful things that we do with our teacher training, but with a focus toward those students. When we look at the other end of the bell curve, there's a lot of constructs that are in place in our field. There's special ed teachers, there's resource teachers, there's coaches, there's mentors, there's a lot of things. Because there's a federal mandate in the states, there's no federal mandate for gifted, but there is a federal mandate for special ed and for EL students. So we have support systems in our school for those students. So when
Yes.
we have narrowed that range by putting the gifted students together in the other class that has all those other students that are at the opposite end of that bell curve, we have that support system in those schools.
So how many clusters are there? Are there three like bands or four bands of students? Like,
Good question. Actually, there's five. There's a
okay,
gifted, high achieving, average, low average, and far below average. And what
right.
we do, we in the cluster classes, we don't have the far below average. In the other classes, we don't have the gifted because there's other support systems for those far
Mhm.
below. But we do have average and low average. But so we have those high achieving students, the
Right.
ones that the parents and teachers think are gifted. We have those as role models basically in other classes. So basically what we want to do is we want to balance the ability and achievement. Because once again, gifted is based on ability, where the other categories are based on achievement. So if we have those high achieving students opposite the gifted, then we have a balance of high ability and high achieving students in every class. And that's what cluster grouping is about.
So if I was a teacher, say I was teaching grade 4, and I had the class that was the most needy, I don't know how they label them, um, the opposite of the gifted class, would that be all of the children in the class? Like they'd be from the lower
No,
two?
no, 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 no.
No.
No, good question, no. And if these are all the categories,
Yeah.
in the gifted class, we're not going to have the high achieving students because those are going to be, and we're not going to have the lowest, but we're going to have um, average and low average. In the other classes, we're going to have the high achieving students, those bright
Mhm.
kids. I call them the hoop jumpers, the kids
Yeah.
that do the homework, turn it in, and get good grades. Um, so all of the classes are going to be heterogeneous.
Okay. And heterogeneous means mixed,
Yes, they're all
just for
going to
people
have
who don't
all
know.
of those different levels in the class. Every class will, but
Oh,
the
okay.
but the
Okay.
gifted cluster class will not have the lowest. And what it does is, as a director, or as a coordinator, as a school administrator, it gives me one teacher at every grade level to focus my training on, to help them learn what giftedness means, but then also how to teach these kids. Um, and the easier kids to have in the class are those bright kids, those high achieving students, because school's designed for them. They do real well
Okay.
in school.
One of the big buzzwords in education is inclusion, which is a beautiful goal. But I think people struggle with how to achieve that, right?
So
And so,
cluster grouping is the way to include to be the most inclusive of our gifted programs.
yeah,
The opposite that would be in a class where we pulled out the gifted kids for an hour a week or an hour a day. That that is that's the least inclusive. Because so if we
okay,
put them together in a classroom, um, the gifted students with the other students, and we focus our professional learning on that cluster with giftedness on that cluster teacher, we're able to help support that teacher. Whereas when the classroom has special ed kids, there's a special ed teacher, a resource teacher to help that teacher.
so if an administrator or teacher wants to learn more about, or psychologist wants to learn more about cluster grouping, what book would you recommend? Because
It's
it's over my head a little bit right now, so I just feel like I need a book.
it,
So what book would you recommend?
It's called the Cluster Grouping Handbook. And if you ask people around the United States how they serve their students, the vast majority will say that they cluster group. And that is based on the book that I wrote. And it first came out in 2008. But it's taken off around the country. Most people do cluster
Because
group.
we are really struggling in the school, all school systems. Like, how can you be inclusive from kindergarten to grade 12, right? And then there's a lot of stuff going on in high school in particular, I think, around like how do we best serve all the students when you have students coming to grade 9 and some of them are, I'll give the most extreme example, at the level of an infant. Some of them are doing grade 1 work. A lot of them are doing grade 4 and 5 work. And then you have kids who are gifted, right? How do you organize that? So I have never heard of cluster grouping, and this gives me a lot of hope. I'm like, oh, there's something like really well thought out, instead of just saying stream, don't stream, get them a TA. Oh, we can't afford a TA. Like this is like a novel thing to me, like, and it
Well,
sounds very promising to me. So thank you.
I will send you a link to some resources so you can look into it. But it is truly the most inclusive way of serving our gifted learners.
Yeah.
But first, we have to identify them. So we have to find equitable practice tools, which is the work that I've done with Jack, to identify them early, cluster group them, and then you'll see that they take off academically. Once the teacher realizes that that child has a lot of potential, and they're grouped with other gifted students who might be high achieving and highly gifted, or high ability and high achieving, I should say. But we group them together, and that's what we call the inclusionary aspect of giftedness. When all the kids, based on their potential, are grouped together regardless of their achievement. So some of those kids at low SES kids that don't speak English, the kids are not achieving. If we want to identify that potential and group them with other gifted learners who have high ability and high achieving, and then they progress through language proficiency levels much more quickly. We teach them build on their strengths, not on their weaknesses.
Wow. So how many school boards do you think? So some school boards have gifted classes, which have different labels, but they're gifted classes, and all the students in there are placed they're all gifted. So, and it's usually not a small class. There's usually like 24 or 25 students in there. That's not the model that you would
No, that
advocate
is,
for.
I do not, only because we're missing the kids that we've been talking about in that model. Now, in my experience as a director, I had an array of services. And I've worked, meaning I had cluster group, I had honors, I had self-contained, what we need to know is that not all gifted kids are at the same level. Some of them are, like you said, high achieving, and some of them are monolingual Spanish or
Yeah,
don't, or,
they're
right?
learning English.
So by grouping them together and giving them different um, entry points into our gifted programs. So like if we group them in cluster group them in the early grades, then by the time they get to fourth, fifth, sixth grade, they might be highly enough to go into the honors classes or the gifted classes like what you described. But we need a
Mhm.
starting point. So what we want to say is to build inclusive programs, we need to have multiple entry points. Not just test once in your fourth grade and never test again. We want to look at it with different tools. If we see some potential in kids, like in your own case, they saw potential, but they didn't
Yeah.
revisit that with a different type of a test.
Okay, so do some school boards test like kindergarten, then grade 4, then grade 8, like multiple times they'll do
Yes,
testing?
yes. I want
Okay.
it. In most of the states, I would say test grade second and then fourth or fifth.
Okay.
That's what we usually you'll find around the states mostly. Now, I advocate for early on because the earlier we catch them, the more effective our instruction can be and
Mhm.
designed to be based on that.
So I'm going to just hold up the book and read the cover. This book is called Understanding and Using the Naglieri General Abilities Test, A Call for Equity in Gifted Education. So can you just talk a little bit about who would want to read this book?
Yes. First of all, if you're giving a test right now and you're missing kids, you're missing kids, right? Because if you break down, Jack and I did a study, looked at the US Census, and if we looked at all the different demographics and we look at the percentage that NADC should be identified, which is about 8%, we can clearly see that we are missing certain kids. So when we developed these tests, we also wanted to write a book to help explain this. So if you're missing these kids, you would probably want to take a look at that book, right? Or if you're adopting the test already, like you are in much of Ontario, you would want to take a look at it as well. Now, Jack wrote the first two chapters, and that's basically what is giftedness, right? How do we identify it, right?
Great question. What is giftedness? Okay.
And then
Yeah.
the third chapters 3 and 4 were written by our other colleague, Dr. Kim Lansdowne, who wrote the quantitative test along with Jack. And then the last two, and those two chapters are how to administer the test. What do you do with the results? How do you speak with parents? How do you speak with teachers? What does the test results show us about academic, about it, instruction? And then the last two chapters I wrote, and that's okay. Now you're identifying these kids you never identified before, from diverse cultures, who from um, areas from kids that might not speak English. What do we do with these kids? They might not fit into your gifted program. So my whole last two chapters are, what do you do with these newly identified students, and how do you modify your gifted program so that they can be more inclusive and more effective with some of these kids that we've been missing before, but now with the new tests we are identifying.
Mm.
And schools need help trying to figure out, because this is, I always call it the gifted programming dilemma. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? The reason I call it that is because a lot of people have this gifted program and it's really nice. They've been doing it for 30 years, right? Or 10 years or 20 years. And they look for kids that'll do well in that program. So they cherry pick the kids that'll do well in the program. Where I take the opposite approach. I want to identify kids who have higher potential and then modify the program to be more inclusive and to effectively engage those kids into those gifted programs that were not invited in before because they didn't fit the program.
I imagine that a kid who didn't get identified, but say their IQ is very, very high, let's say 150, um, they would become very disillusioned at school and very bored and frustrated and
And disenfranchised, because so one of my professors at ASU, he was my chair for my doctoral program. He always says it's not wise to make smart enemies, and by that he means that we are disenfranchising certain groups because we're not being inclusive. They're not being part of our program, but they're smart, right? They have that
yeah,
high potential. They might not speak English, they might not get good grades, but those are the kids that concern me the most. The kids that have that potential that are not being recognized in the schools. And so that's what's driven my work over the last 30 some years, um, because we know they're there.
yeah, yeah. Um, so we're gonna be finished soon, but if you could give some advice to parents of children who are gifted, or very, very bright, what would your advice be?
Okay, the parents that have over the years been very successful advocating for their kids at school might have some background or some higher education, and they know the questions to ask. So it's the parents that I say, don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to say, go to the school and the teacher say, you should see what my child's doing at home compared to what he's doing at school. Or
Yeah,
my child doesn't speak English, but she's brilliant. You can see this through art, music, PE. When I was a coordinator, I would meet with the special ed teachers, the language acquisition teachers, the special area teachers, the art, music, PE, orchestra, all those teachers, because I want to give them some things to look at within their domain. And then they're going to say, oh, this child needs to be tested, right? So I
mhm,
think we just need to share more with our school staff, our district staff, what it means, what this identification means, and how find different ways to look for these kids that have been missed before. Um, but parents need to speak up for their kids. They do. And
yeah.
I always say in a positive way, all right? Don't go in and demand, my child needs this. Go in and say, this is what I'm seeing at home. Help me. Do you see this in school? And just open that conversation.
I would always say ask for a translator if you need one, and
Absolutely.
make sure you get one, and follow up with a written email.
Absolutely. Yes.
because people are more accountable when there's something followed up in writing.
And as long as you approach these in a positive way, people will want, school
Yeah,
folks will want to listen to you because we come into education because we want to do what's right for kids. We
yeah,
want to nurture them and we care. We're caregivers. We want to. And so if you have information that the school is not seeing, find a way to share that. It's very important. It can change the trajectory of your child's life.
okay. So, did your son ever go to a smaller class in his education?
He was actually, we used cluster grouping at that time.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, yeah, and so he was with other gifted students, even though he was dyslexic, dysgraphic, and ADD, so he couldn't read, write, or pay attention,
Um,
but he's brilliant. So those are that brilliance in some of these kids is what we try to teach teachers what to find. And these tests that I developed with Dr. Naglieri do just that. Because there's no academic knowledge in those tests, there's no language. So we're really broadening our vision on who gets into our programs based
yeah.
on a more equitable approach to identification.
And I think it would serve autistic children with autism well as well because they're similar to your son. They have these comorbid issues that
Yes,
makes them less likely to be nominated, and we wouldn't want to
yes.
overlook them
Eh,
because
Yeah,
of difficulties with social skills.
sure. And that's why I said there's special ed kids with IEPs in every single achievement level, right? And so we want to bring those kids together, the kids that might, um, you know, have some of that comorbidity, group them together, and then base emphasize their strengths.
So I just want to say this book is available on Amazon, and I'm sure your book, Handbook of Cluster Grouping, is also available on Amazon. And I just want to ask you, do you have any social media or a webpage that people can learn about you at?
Yes, my website is called, it's a mouthful, Gifted Education Consultants. So if
Oh,
you
that's
just
okay.
so if you just Google Gifted Education Consultants, you'll see some of my work, some of the tools that I like to share, some of the research, some of the resources that we want schools to look at. And then, of course, my other website is with Jack, and that's called the Naglieri Ability Test.
Okay, and I'll put the websites, both of them, in the description of the video so people can have them there. And I just want to thank you for being my guest today.
Oh, you're very
Um,
welcome. And I want to also let your viewers know if they've got questions, if you want to talk more about reach out to me. My email is first initial last name at gmail.com. So it's DBRULLES at Gmail. And I'm happy to share other resources and ideas with you.
and it sounds like you had such great success with your son. It sounds like he has a really exciting career.
Yeah, he does. And it's those are the kids that they have that potential, and we just have to figure out a
Yeah.
way to tap into it and to be patient with them.
And yeah, and like things could have gone differently for him, right? If he was from a different type of family, maybe, and there was nobody to advocate for him, they would have made a smart enemy, perhaps, instead of the good
Yes,
friend they have now.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say goodbye.
Thank you for your attention to this important topic.
And thank you for being here.